All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fiercely critical forensic audit of the August 2021 Kabul Withdrawal. The source text we're examining makes a highly controversial claim. It argues that this event wasn't just a blunder or a mistake, but rather a deliberate, multi-billion-dollar weapons transfer and a biological betrayal. We're going to neutrally map out exactly what the text argues, sticking strictly to the data and the hardware detailed in our sources. So right off the bat, the source text calculates a staggering number. $7.1 billion in advanced military hardware was left behind. That is, billion with a B. The author explicitly rejects the idea that this was just incompetence or a simple logistical failure. Instead, the text describes the event as an intentional archaeonic reset. Now, that's a term the author uses to describe a deliberate rearming of the geopolitical board, supposedly to ensure future profitable conflicts. To really grasp the gravity of this audit, we have to look at two totally different perspectives side by side. The government's official narrative claimed that the abandoned gear was demilitarized, obsolete, or just way too complex for the Taliban to figure out. But the source's fierce assertion is that this was actually a fully functional, taxpayer-funded weapons transfer to a hostile force. They argue it effectively bypassed laws like the Arms Export Control Act by funneling the equipment through the doomed proxy of the collapsing Afghan government.
Let's move into Section 1, the Taliban Air Force, and take a closer look at that abandoned hardware.
According to the itemized ledger in our source, the U.S. left behind dozens of perfectly operational airframes. We're talking about an estimated 40 UH-60 Blackhawks, 50 MD-530F attack helicopters, and 23 A-29 Super Tucano bombers. The text actually argues that the widely circulated public footage, the clips of soldiers smashing up instrument panels in a few helicopters in Kabul, was pure theater. It claims that masked the reality that dozens of pristine aircraft were simply abandoned at provincial bases that had already fallen. What's really fascinating here, and honestly kind of chilling, is the strategic argument the author makes about why those specific helicopters were even there. The text asserts that the Afghan forces, who were super used to these easy-to-maintain Russian Mi-17s, were literally forced to transition to complex American Blackhawks. The author claims this was a corporate mandate to enrich defense contractors, ensuring the fleet would ground itself the second American maintenance crews were abruptly pulled out, basically guaranteeing the collapse of the Afghan infantry. Which brings us to Section 2, surrendering the night and losing that crucial tactical edge. The forensic audit claims up to 30,000 sets of advanced night vision goggles, including top-tier military spec AN/PVS-14s and thermal imaging sights, were surrendered directly to the enemy. These are units that cost American taxpayers thousands of dollars a pop. And the author uses this fact to illustrate an absolutely critical point. For 2 decades, the fundamental tactical advantage of U.S. forces was pretty simple. The Taliban owned the day, but the U.S. owned the night. Well, by transferring over $100 million in restricted optical technology, that supremacy was erased, literally overnight. The source emphasizes that the Taliban no longer has to hide in the dark. Equipped with this gear, they can now hunt in it. Now, we transition to Section 3, the Biometric Panopticon, or what the text calls the biological betrayal. To understand how this trap worked, we need to define the abandoned hardware itself. Enter the HIIDE scanners. That stands for Handheld Interagency Identity Detection Equipment. Costing up to $12,000 each, these ruggedized devices acted as mobile terminals for a massive, unfakeable biological dragnet. We're talking about capturing 10-print fingerprints, facial data, and iris scans of Afghan citizens and allies. The source actually points to the specific patented technology driving these devices. U.S. Patent 5291560A. It details John Daugman's algorithm, which is the mathematics used by these scanners to translate the unique, complex geometry of a human iris into an unalterable 256-byte digital code. The text argues this effectively reduced a person's entire identity into a permanent biological barcode. Here's where it gets really interesting. The text highlights a massive discrepancy between public statements and the technical reality. It argues the Pentagon threw up a bureaucratic shield by claiming these abandoned scanners were just dumb terminals that were completely useless without an internet connection to U.S. servers. But our source points out that the device's very own patents prove they were specifically engineered for offline use in austere environments, and they possessed massive internal hard drives. So what was actually on those local hard drives? The source ominously refers to it as the Ledger of Souls. Before heading out on patrols, soldiers synced these devices to download profiles from massive mainframes called APPs and ABIS. This meant the local scanners were loaded with the unencrypted employment history of American allies, their known associates, their tribes, and even whether they had worked directly for the CIA or the U.S. Marines. Now, if you have any doubts about the data security of these abandoned devices, the source cites a 2022 forensic audit by independent cybersecurity researchers at the Chaos Computer Club. They literally went online and purchased used Seek-2 devices, which are the successors to the HIIDE scanners, and found verifiable proof that they were left totally unencrypted. They still held the unredacted biological and GPS data of thousands of people. Let's look at how this played out on the ground in Section 4, the execution protocol and the checkpoint dragnet. The author breaks down this dragnet into 4 brutal, efficient steps. First, a vehicle stopped. Second, the scanner reads the eye using that patented near-infrared camera. Third, it cross-references the internal, completely unencrypted database. And finally, the screen flashes green or red, instantly displaying that person's employment history. The text drives home a terrifying reality here. A forged passport is completely useless against a machine mathematically scanning the geometry of your eye. Think about that level of inescapable surveillance for a second. It's like using Face ID on your smartphone, but with immediate, lethal consequences at a roadside checkpoint. The audit reaches a furious conclusion here. It asserts that the intelligence apparatus built a flawless, inescapable biological panopticon. They literally mandated that their Afghan translators, guides, and allies step inside the system just to receive their paychecks or get base access. And then, according to the text, they surrendered the entire unencrypted database right over to the Taliban. To put the sheer scale of this biological handover into perspective, the source states that a single unencrypted HIIDE device held the localized, biologically locked profiles of up to 10,000 curated targets. By abandoning thousands of these scanners, the text argues that a perfectly curated kill list was handed directly to the new regime. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're left with the text's final, deeply provocative question. Considering the meticulously engineered patents, the unencrypted localized databases, and the $7.1 billion in functional aerospace and optical hardware left sitting on the tarmac, can we truly dismiss this entire event as mere bureaucratic incompetence? The source material demands we look hard at the data and ask if this was instead the deliberate arming of an empire. Thanks for tuning in, and keep questioning the data.